Well, a welcome to this video and a very warm welcome back to James Roguski. James, thank you for coming back.
Well, it's always an honor, John. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all that you've been doing.
No, I mean, you are the expert in this. I mean, we've just been talking about this, James. We think you've been probably working on this pretty well full time now for getting on for 2 years. So thank you for that. And why did you start?
I wake up every morning and do what my insides tell me to do, and I follow that guidance, and it usually directs me into some very interesting and wonderful places. And back on March 28th of 2022, I was awakened at 4 in the morning and went looking on the internet, which is not unusual, okay? Usually not at 4 in the morning. And I discovered a document that, led me down into the WHO rabbit hole. And so, for anybody who's new, please understand that 2 years ago, I had no idea about any of this. And hopefully, the research that I've done can speed the learning curve for everybody else. You won't have to go through 2 years of material, and hopefully, we'll bring everybody up to speed as fast as possible.
What are your main concerns as we speak about these? We were talking about the pandemic accords and the international health regulations amendments, aren't we? What is it that's concerning you? What are the main points, James?
Well, I'm probably going to surprise you with my answer, John, because I'm actually very optimistic. And, being concerned about something and not, not having your head in the sand is where you want to be. But there's nothing about this that is leaving me in fear or afraid for the future. I'm actually very optimistic. And I don't want any of this to appear like fear mongering and, the world is going to end because most people, I think, are not aware of why the WHO and all these negotiations are happening. And so, if you start off with an inaccurate premise or assumption, you're going to head down the wrong path. And so, the core behind what is causing or started these negotiations is actually the same thing that you've been talking about for years, which is a misguided assumption that the jabs are wonderful and we need more of them. And so, what we're dealing with here is not what most people, I think it to be. We're dealing with a trade dispute between poor nations and wealthy nations, going all the way back to December 1st, 2021. And what has happened is there's this confusing mix of all these different documents, but the core is a flawed assumption that wealthy nations hogged up all these wonderful jabs, and poor nations felt they were being inequitably treated from a trade perspective, and they want to negotiate an agreement so that that never happens again. Now, if 2 years ago the wealthy nations were hoarding food and water, and the poor nations said, hey, that's not right. We should have our fair share of food and water. We need an international agreement to properly, in their terms, equitably distribute and make available pandemic response or related products. If it was food and water, you would be like, well, they have an argument. So if this was happening in the World Trade Organization, it would almost make sense. But what you have to do, and what everybody has to do for this discussion that we're going to have, is erase everything that you have said and people have learned over the last 2 years, because everyone involved in these negotiations thinks that the jabs are just wonderful and they want investment and they want manufacturing capacity so that they can make their own jabs in the future and they won't be victimized by the European Union or Canada or the United States or the UK getting a contract for 10 times what they need. And so the core behind these crazy negotiations is just got nothing at all to do with health, even though it's happening under the guidance of the World Health Organization. This is a trade dispute over who gets more biological weapons. It's insanity.
But there are specific things that we are concerned about. So, for example, well, the list is long, but one of the things that concerns me is the World Health Organization. It appears to me is attempting to counter what it would classify as disinformation, what we would count as perhaps freedom of speech, that it's going to work through international organisations to further curtail our freedoms of speech, which are already really quite limited. I mean, is that part of the international health regulations, to limit freedom of information and to control information?
Well, the first part of the answer to that has to be these documents are in a constant state of flux, and they have been over the last year and a half because, quote unquote, they're negotiating them. And so, with the first track, which are amendments to the international health regulations, it talks a little bit about having control over information, and quite frankly, the infodemic comes from the WHO. They pump out millions of words. Let me tell you, I've been living on their word salad for 2 years, and so in the amendments, there's a little bit of that, but in what most people call the pandemic treaty. But the one point that I want to make about that particular document, it's had many, many, many different names. The real danger in that particular document is that it is currently set up as a framework convention. And what that means is they want to set up a whole new bureaucracy, fund it with billions of dollars, and have them meet every year, have a conference of the parties, much like the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so just the concept of what is behind what most people call the pandemic treaty is so deeply flawed down to its core. Why in the world would any people, any nation, want to submit themselves to an unchecked bureaucracy? Well, hey, wait a minute. They did that in 1992 with the Framework Convention for Climate Change. They just had their 28th Conference of the Parties. If you want to see the future under the pandemic treaty, just remember that it's a framework convention that would set up a yearly meeting for unelected people to make decisions that, if the nations sign on to it, they would be obligated to do whatever these unelected, unaccountable, unknown people decide. Let me ask everybody watching a question. Do you know who represented your nation at COP28? Okay, my understanding is there was like 100,000 people there, and so the whole concept of a framework convention should just have a wooden stake driven through the heart of it. That is just that is not even negotiable as far as I'm concerned. Now, I do admit, I think I forgot what your question was. What is my concern about the treaty, or we were talking about censorship? Okay, so in the treaty, depending upon which version you look through, that article has grown and gotten larger and smaller and more extensive and less extensive. The point comes back to the original point that we made in this conversation. They are all working under the assumption that the world did not get enough jabs. They need more jabs. They need more pharmaceutical treatments. Everybody should have had more access to a ventilator and midazolam and Paxlovid and molnupiravir and every other drug that a pharmaceutical company can make, and the capacity to manufacture all those toxic substances in either the region or the smaller country. They have not been watching your videos, John. They have no idea that what they're actually arguing for will harm people's health rather than improve it. And if you start off understanding that, back on December 1st, 2021, there was a fork in the road. They were feeling, many of the nations were feeling that they weren't getting enough access to these life-saving products. And in the 2 years since then, they've had blinders on, right? And they don't want to watch any of your, videos or the millions of other things that people have been saying. And so what they're negotiating for is the intellectual property and the financial resources and the investment capital. They're not talking to doctors about how do you, properly share information so that you can learn how to treat, any ailment. They just want to build out the pharmaceutical industry so that they get more of what we're trying to stop.
But there is a lot of things like that, they're taking out in the international health regulations, taking out things that say non-binding to make it binding. There's this
Oh,
attempted
if I may stop you there, John.
imposition,
If I may stop you
as
there.
many people see it.
That
Please.
particular, let's talk just specifically about that because there's a piece of that puzzle that I think maybe many people just haven't had a chance to hear about. One of the reasons why that is there isn't it fits that puzzle piece fits right in. So Bangladesh and the 47 nations of Africa um, both submitted in the amendments a new Article 13A. And this is really, I think, at the heart of what's in these amendments. Their solution to this trade dispute would be to empower the Director General with the ability to, after having declared an emergency, a public health emergency of international concern, a fake, he would then be empowered to decide immediately what material were needed, personal protective equipment, drugs, jabs, whatever it might be. Then he would be given the authority to set up an allocation mechanism and given the authority to tell Nation A, well, your manufacturers have to make what he would say and deliver it to whichever nation needed whatever the problem was. Now, in a perfect world, okay, if my neighbor knocks on my door and says, hey, my wife's, baking a cake and we need some flour, okay, or I'm cutting the grass and my lawnmower broke, can I borrow yours? Oh, sure, by all means, here you go. But I don't want to have a third neighbor in the neighborhood tell me that his friend down the street needs something and I have to give it to him, right? So that mechanism was from Bangladesh and from the African nations. And so Bangladesh crossed out the term non binding so that recommendations made by the Director General as the director of logistics and command and control and quite frankly a very Marxist communist control of the means of production. um, his directives would be orders. You have to make what I tell you to make, and you have to give it to them. Now, we don't know if that is still kicking around in the amendments that have been proposed because these negotiations have been completely secret. Now, it appears that that idea is still being negotiated. And so, one of the things that I hope everybody takes home from this is January 27th, just a couple of weeks away, is the deadline, 4 months in advance of the May Assembly, where whatever nations might want to submit as proposed amendments, Article 55 of the regulation says that they got to give us 4 weeks' notice. So I hope that all of your viewers are on the alert, watching like a hawk. I mean, I'll certainly be reporting on it as soon as I find out about it. They told us back in October that they were not going to meet their deadlines because they're not reaching agreement on that issue and many others. And so a document is supposed to be submitted to all of the nations through the Director General 4 months in advance of the May meeting. Here are the amendments, the final version, and in their terms, a final package of targeted amendments in alignment with Article 55. And here's what may or may not happen. Okay, they may not submit any document. They may submit magically, a finely crafted package of amendments that are ready to go, and all they have to do is pretend to vote on them, and we'll talk about that in a minute. What they said they were going to do, and I think that this is what they're likely to do, is present something, prior to January 27th, and do everything they can to just ignore that deadline, but yet not actually present a package of amendments that the world will be able to review for 4 months. I think that they are conspiring to try to violate that rule and keep these negotiations going all the way right up to the last minute, completely in violation of Article 55. And so, if there are any lawyers watching this video, by all means, please, give me a phone call. We need to hold them to their own rules, which I really want to talk about how they violated those back in 2022. But to go back to your question about the binding and non-binding nature of the recommendations, even the International Health Regulations Review Committee, who published their report way back on February 6th, almost a year ago, they said, well, wait a minute, that's going to change the entire nature of the WHO. It's an advisory body. If recommendations are suddenly mandatory, hold on just a moment. And that's what everybody in the world, who's aware of this is saying, oh, no, 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 no. You don't get to be the boss of the world. It's bad enough that you're giving bad advice. If we're legally bound to obey your bad advice, the answer is to get the heck out of the WHO.
But it sounds quite concerning that these negotiations could be ongoing right up until the deadline in May, and yet they are not transparent. They're behind closed doors, so we don't know what's being negotiated. It sounds like we might be given a fait accompli the day before validation in May, and we don't know what we're going to get. I mean, is there a lot of unknowns at the moment?
Well, again, there are two separate tracks, okay? The amendments and what everybody calls the treaty, but it's really a framework convention. And so they have different rules depending upon which document you're talking about. And what you said is exactly the case with the amendments. They have said as much. Now, they've already scheduled a meeting for the first week of February and the last week of April for the amendments. Now, if they were honorable people back in October, they would have said, we're having a difficult time. We've got 200 pages worth of amendments, 300 different ideas that we're trying to juggle here, 196 nations to try to come to an agreement. If they were honorable, they would have said, sorry, we're going to have to give you a report, a progress report, which is what they're supposed to do. And we're just not going to make it. We're not going to meet the January deadline. Now, there's a video clip that I've published many times, and they said exactly that. They know the rules. They said that they're not going to meet their deadline, but what they didn't say is that, sorry, we failed. Now it's not easy to admit failure, but they are on the cusp of failing. If by January 27th they do not submit a targeted package of, or a final package of targeted amendments in alignment with Article 55, sorry, Charlie, we'll see you in 2025. I'll be right here waiting for you. Okay, but you do not get to even, pretend to vote on any changes to the international health regulations unless everyone gets to see the final version before January 27th, 2024. Now, we shall see, what they do. We get to watch this slow motion train wreck in real time. And, thank you for having me on, because the whole point is to get people's eyes on the WHO. If no one's watching, they'll cheat like they did in 2022. And if I can, I'll venture right into that topic.
2022, yeah.
Okay. So you asked me, how I got all started in this. Back on January 18th, 2022, the Biden administration submitted proposed amendments to the international health regulations. There were changes to 13 amendments. And when you put into context the time frame, right? On December 1st, all of the nations had just come out of a special assembly meeting saying they want an international agreement that is going to settle this trade dispute problem. And a month and a half later, on January 18th, 2022, the Biden administration puts in a bunch of amendments that didn't address that at all. It just put more requirements on nations to do surveillance and all that sort of thing. And they kicked that to the curb. They basically said, did you not hear what we're upset about? Now, one of the other things that was in that proposed set of amendments from the Biden administration would change the time frame that nations would have to consider amendments after they had been adopted. So this is the part of the international health regulations that just hurts everyone's brain, because quite frankly, it's just wrong. The way this thing is structured is a bunch of unelected delegates get together and they decide whether or not to adopt amendments. And then there's an 18-month period where the head of state of any given nation can just write a letter to the WHO and tell them, sorry, we reject these amendments for our nation. Now, it appears that New Zealand's new government has done that for those regulations. I haven't been able to get the actual letter that may or may not have been sent. But the point is, every nation has an 18-month period to reject them. And then 6 months after that, or 24 months, it would come into effect. Well, Biden wanted to shorten those time frames down to 6 months. Now, if you think about next May, this coming May, 6 months from the end of May is sometime in December. And so the Biden administration was trying to set it up for this next round of amendments so that it would be over and done while his first term was still happening before January 2025, when hopefully we'll get a new president. Now, that didn't pass, that didn't fly. And so, in my view, illegitimately, in the middle of the assembly, the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, a handful of other countries submitted a new package of amendments. And this is the part that is astonishing, but the evidence is right in front of everyone. On May 28th, they presented a document, and it was the amendments to 5 articles, changing those timeframes, not to 6 months. It ended up being 10 months and 12 months instead of 6. They had their lawyer put their name on it, saying it's a certified copy, and they said that it was adopted in their 8th meeting. Well, there's a little problem with that, John. They record those meetings, and in their 8th meeting, they never voted on that document. They just flat out created a fraudulent document claiming to have adopted it by some type of vote in their 8th plenary session, and they're lying. Now, 12 members of the European Parliament on November 28th 2023, a little bit more than a month ago, wrote a letter to the WHO and to the Director General Tedros, and they said, we're looking for evidence that there was a vote on those amendments. And if you don't provide it, we have to assume that the changes that you claim to have made on May 28th, 2022 are null and void. And so, you know, the evidence is all right there. Anybody can watch the eighth plenary session and, sit there looking to see if they ever got around to even talking about that document, and they never did. It's just blatant voter or voting fraud. And it's astonishing, but I'm pretty sure that the WHO didn't put out a press release saying, "Hey, look at how we tricked everybody," so that the media would present it to the world. Um, that is astonishing, and it should be the subject of discussion around the world. How could the WHO attempt to trick everyone into believing that they adopted changes to international law and they can't produce evidence of a vote? It's astonishing. It's just absolutely amazing. And so, what I feel that they're trying to do with this next round is, there's an Article 55 rule that we have to be able to see whatever it is they may be considering in May. And if they don't provide it, then they don't get to consider it in May. Now, I see that as wonderful news.
But that doesn't seem to bother them, does it? If they're not obeying the rules.
If you were playing a board game, John, and chess or checkers or Monopoly or whatever, if you don't know how the pieces move, if you don't know the rules, and you're playing with somebody who knows the rules inside and out, they can bend the rules or they can break the rules, and you would be none the wiser. And they would always seem to win. What I'm trying to do, and thank you for helping, is to raise everyone's awareness. And once you shine light on the darkness, that they're trying to operate in, if you do that in a commercial kitchen, the cockroaches and the rats go running because they don't want this to see the light of day. So thank you for helping share it with your audience, because if we just simply remain silent and we don't push back against what I feel are their criminal activity, they'll just keep doing it.
If there was armies massing on the borders, as in previous times when we countries united to fight fascism, or if there had been an evil ideology that was seeking to take over the world, we could argue about the domino theories, but soldiers were sent to fight this perceived problem around the world. So we've seen off communism, we've seen off fascism. It looks now, and a lot of people are concerned about this, that the power of the nation, the power of the nation state is being subverted by what some people see as international manipulation by stealth. Is that, am I being a bit unduly concerned there? Or, given that us and previous generations have fought off these overt risks, do you see that there's more covert risks now that I'm worried about? And do you think people are justified to be worried about this?
Well, the definition or the root of the word government, is control of the mind. And so let me shift gears at the risk of confusing people, because I normally don't talk about the World Economic Forum, but it's a good example. If you change the name of the World Economic Forum and you said that they were ISIS or the Taliban, imagine if the Taliban, I guess in Afghanistan, was recruiting the best and the brightest from around the world. Come on over to our training camp in Davos, right, and learn our methods, and then go back to your cabinet in Canada or wherever you may be. We would be at war.
New Zealand, the United Kingdom.
We would recognize that we are being infiltrated. It's mind control. The people who go to Davos or Davos, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, maybe, and get their instructions implanted in their mind, they come away with a different set of beliefs that they then come home with. And whether they are in Australia or New Zealand or Canada or the UK, they believe that philosophy. They believe that the jabs are needed. They believe that pharmaceutical drugs are the only answer to, dealing with health. And so the tentacles of the WHO and the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are tapped into people's minds. And if you close that off and you turn the scientific method into scientism, where it's a religion and a
Mm.
belief, oh, carbon dioxide is the cause of all the world's, future catastrophic problems. It's an existential problem. If you cannot dislodge that fallacy, people operate with an illusion, within an illusion, and they will not communicate. Now, forget about climate change, forget about the World Economic Forum, and really, quite frankly, forget about the WHO and these negotiations and all of that stuff. The problem that you've been talking about and your own personal ability, kudos to you for having a set of beliefs, facing the facts, and altering your view of, what is really going on is the core of sanity. And these people are insane because they have blinders on. They are negotiating a trade dispute in the World Health Organization. And what they're arguing for really is a platform that is perfectly structured for biological warfare. They want to set up a One Health agenda to go into every nation on the planet because they don't have it set up in all the little tiny poor nations. People have better things to do with their time and money than to go into, every swab that goes up someone's nose or in some other orifice, any any DNA sample that you can get from anywhere. Your pet, right? You take your pet to the veterinarian and they get a stool sample or whatever. Oh my goodness, they're trying to build this genetic acquisition network because based on a 1992 conference um, for biological diversity, convention for biological diversity, sorry, um, nations who their indigenous population have learned of the benefits of herbs and natural products for health realize that pharmaceutical companies love to swoop in, take that information. It's quite frankly what they did with ivermectin. It's a bacterial produced set of substances. They identified that in Japan. They tweaked the chemical just a little bit. Now they have a pharmaceutically, protected, patent protected product. The concern, and this really happened with South Africa and Botswana with Omicron, when they announced to the world almost 2 years, 2 or 3 years ago now, it's quite some time, they were not greeted with, oh, thank you very much for obeying the rules in the international health regulations. All of the other nations violated the protections that the IHR was supposed to give, and they put travel restrictions on South Africa. That's one of the reasons why the African nations are saying, well, hold on just a moment. These pathogens and their genomic sequences are a valuable commodity. And so, what they've worked into the treaty is what they call a pathogen access and benefit sharing system. It goes all the way back to events that happened in Indonesia over a decade ago. They realized that if they find a new flu virus, new bird flu, new swine flu, whatever it may be, that's actually valuable to pharmaceutical companies. And so what they are negotiating in this pathogen access benefit sharing system in in compared to what I was talking about with the very Marxist dictatorial put Tedros in charge of the means of production around the world, the pathogen access benefit sharing system would have nations be obligated to set up laboratories, look everywhere they possibly can, stool samples, in your chicken coop, your pigsty, your farm, your hospital, your septic system, your sewage treatment plant, your wastewater. Go looking for pathogens with pandemic potential because that's a moneymaker. Share that with the
And send all the
WHO's.
information to the WHO, who are then going to control that information.
Share that with the pharmaceutical companies, and in their latest version, 20% of whatever products were then manufactured, I would call them biological weapons, 20% would be given to the WHO to distribute wherever they see fit. Now, that's sort of a more capitalistic answer to this trade dispute. So what you're really looking at is a communist Marxist philosophical, treatment of a trade dispute, or this pathogen access benefit sharing system, capitalist view, free market, regulated trade of, yeah, we'll give you our valuable resource. And this is the crazy part that people need to understand. This is not about your health. This is about building out what I call the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. Let's go find the next pathogen with pandemic potential, bring it into the lab, do a little bit of whether they want to call it gain of function or dual use research of concern, basically set up, a biological warfare infrastructure and have the pharmaceutical companies. Now, here's where the sticking point is. The pharmaceutical companies don't want to share the intellectual property with the relatively poor nations because the poor nations want a piece of that pie. And what we're dealing with here is an argument over money. All of this information is spectacular resource for fear mongering to make people take whatever drug or jab they say. If you walk outside of your home and you imagine where the sewer line either goes to a septic system or to a down to the sewage treatment plant, if you realize that if they tested whatever's in the manhole right there, which they do worldwide, right, and they find some new form of polio or whatever it is they claim to find, they want to be able to say, oh, well, all of this neighborhood feeds into this mainline sewage system. You guys all need to get locked down and injected because we found a new pathogen in your neighborhood. Now, now that's just flat out dystopia. That is just, control at a level, but you got to realize that's not really about your health. That's about building out an industry that has a control grid and is financially outlandishly profitable. The only answer to all of this is you people are crazy and mix in a little bit of evil for the desire to control people in that fashion. The one thing that, John, nobody has been talking about at all. And I want to start with, I personally feel that the entire structure, the WHO Constitution, and this whole agreement, there are people in the UK who just reached out to me this morning who are pointing out that the method by which we even entered into the WHO is fraudulent. The way we entered into the IHR, there never was a proper vote in Congress or the Senate or Parliament. So I'm coming from a perspective of, this is all fraudulent. But if for the sake of argument, you accept that the WHO Constitution gave them certain authorities, they're supposedly negotiating these regulation changes, these amendments, under Article 21 of their Constitution. Well, Article 21 gave the World Health Assembly authority to set standards and regulations on a number of different things. And I'm just going to go through a quick list. They could be negotiating terminology, right? What are the definition of terms? Now, we know they can change recommendations, but, are they going to come up with the definition for a pandemic? What is the definition of a vaccine? What is the definition of the word safe or effective? They're not talking about those. There's no, anything in the amendments that I have seen. They also have the authority to set standards for cause of death. Well, that was certainly an issue with COVID. Did you die from it or with it? They also have authority to set standards for um, diagnostic testing. Anybody who's looked at the PCR knows that it's a wonderful procedure, but it's not really meant to be a diagnostic for whether or not someone has a disease or may not be contagious. They have the authority to set standards for the purity of pharmaceutical and biological products. Well, anybody who's been paying attention to all the garbage that is in the injectables realizes that it would have been nice if they were actually monitoring that. They've failed miserably. And last but not least, they have the authority under Article 21 to regulate labeling and advertising. Well, labeling includes those blank inserts that people were supposed to read in order to get all the information that they need to determine whether or not, they wanted to give their consent. And, in my personal view, any advertising on any product across the board that says it's safe and effective, those words should be viewed as a lie because that's not how they're supposed to do it. They're supposed to say, well, here's what the studies show are the potential benefits, and here are the potential risks based on your demographic. If you're an infant, there's a different set of risks and a different set of benefits. If you're a 90-year-old elderly man or woman, the risks actually are much higher. And, so it's an individual decision. Any person who says any product is safe and effective should think about something like people who have peanut allergies. Peanuts are safe and effective for me, and I eat them, but someone else would look at that same peanut and go, oh my God, that'll kill me. And we need to look at, products, whether they're pharmaceutical or natural, and understand anyone who makes that blanket statement is either just completely unaware and is trying to make something be this or that when what they really should be talking about are statistical probabilities. And and so for 77 years, the World Health Assembly has failed to set standards and regulations on the things that I just mentioned. And there's every indication that they're planning to fail again. They're not talking about any of those things. And that's the problem. It's the inability for the people who are involved in these negotiations to have an open mind and realize that they're arguing for more poisonous biological injections and drugs for the poor nations of the world. If you step back and you observe what they're doing, you realize that they're just crazy. And the only answer, there's no talking to them. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to even discuss or think about it. The answer around the world, I believe, is that we need to exit the WHO, and quite frankly, they really should be abolished because the damage that they are about to do, if they were to be allowed to let this happen, is astronomical, absolutely astronomical. But I am optimistic because their greed is causing them to have difficulty in reaching an agreement. They're arguing over intellectual property and investment. And so pay attention. On January 27th, they are, I believe, likely to publish some kind of a document that is inadequate. And we need to hold them to the rule of law and say, no, you either have a final package of targeted amendments in alignment with Article 55, and we all get to see it for 4 months and talk about it, um, or you don't get to make any changes in May. And with the treaty, the nations are so unhappy with the intergovernmental negotiating body because they have not been listening to the nations, even though they lie and they say that it's a member nation led process. The nations who are trying to get their text into the document sent them back to the drawing board, and they have a meeting set for the treaty negotiations at the end of February. So sometime between now and the end of February, we'll probably see, the sixth or seventh or eighth version of whatever it is they may be negotiating. And they're going to have 2 week long marathon sessions twice. So 2 weeks and then another 2 week session. They don't have the requirement with that document to show it to us prior to the May assembly. They're just going to keep going, and we shall see what the new version has. I caution people to talk about the details because both of these agreements are in a complete and total state of flux. And that's a good thing because they're having a hard time getting all of the nations to agree to whatever it is they plan to do. The simple answer from me is no. You guys are arguing about the wrong thing completely.
But again, many people are concerned that this will be done via sort of unconventional means. As we've already discussed, that's open. To what degree are, and I just have to force myself to use the word here, James, to what degree are philanthropists, individuals involved in manipulating this situation?
Well, one of the things that really got me to pay very serious close attention to this happened in November of 2022 at the B20 meeting in Bali. They have the G20 nations meet, and then all the business leaders meet. The Indonesian health minister came out and he said a couple of things. In particular, you mentioned the philanthropist. What he said to this group of business people was about what the United States put together called the Pandemic Fund. In December of that year, the United States government passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which should give you a clue. This is coming from the Defense Department. Okay, it's the global health security agenda. I read that as biological warfare. They're worried that other nations are going to find pathogens and turn them into weapons, so they want to do that first. And so they authorized $1 billion a year as seed money for the World Bank's pandemic fund. And they've been distributing hundreds of millions of dollars throughout 2023 to nations who are willing to build biological labs to go seek out new pathogens. And what the health minister said back in November of 2022 to all these business people, go invest. There's billions of dollars coming into this industry, laboratory equipment, facilities, manufacturing plants, all that sort of stuff. And so this is a growth industry. Now, whether or not people believe that the Wuhan laboratory was the source of the problem, there's many, different ideas of what might have happened. If you, for sake of discussion, look at their famous bat lady, right, going into the, bat caves somewhere in China, identifying what they believe to be pathogens, bringing them into the lab, and working on making them, more dangerous, in giving them gain of function. It's the height of insanity to think that pumping tens of billions of dollars into building more labs, bringing more pathogens into labs, doing more gain of function work is the way in which you would stop the next pandemic. That's just completely backwards. What we're dealing with is an attempt to build out a biological warfare infrastructure under the guise of the World Health Organization. And that in one level, I am optimistic because I think they're failing and enough people are becoming aware of what they're doing. But one of the things I'd like to just say to you, John, is thank you. And I've dedicated I've dedicated my life to this over the past 2 years, and I'm stepping up my level of dedication. And so from now, until this is stopped, what I'm going to do with this video is, it's going to take you a while to, get it out there into the public. I'm going to put an article together featuring this video with all of the details, all of the evidence, all of the documents. And anybody in the world who wants to reach out to me and give me a phone call or a text message or WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram or however you might want to communicate, my phone number is 310-619-3055. I'm in California, so use the proper country code or connect with me on one of those communications apps. Everybody should have questions. And my view is that I've got a wealth of information because I've been dealing with this for 2 years. I view questions as a contribution because what it tells me is if somebody is, watching this right now and they have some questions, it means they're still able to think. And I want to get to know them. The more people who have questions in the world, the better. And so, please feel free to reach out to me, 310-619-3055. I'll probably get swamped because you've got a lot of viewers, but, I'm here to serve. I'm here to help everybody, get clear on all this insanity because we cannot be silent about what they're doing because what they're trying to do is control the world by building a biological warfare infrastructure. And that is so unbelievably insane. Okay. We must stop it.
Lots of people watching this, James, they're going to be infuriated, but what does an individual do?
Well,
Can we write to members of public? What do we do?
Well, there's a multitude of things that nations, people around the world in various nations have set up. I'll put all of this in my article that goes along with this. In the United States, we have a piece of legislation that is in both houses of Congress. If people in the U.S. go to stoptheglobalagenda.com, you can put your support behind that and reach out to your members of Congress and the Senate. In Canada, until February 7th, there is you can just go to CanadianPetition.com to exit the WHO. In the UK, there is a similar petition. I encourage people to sign that. I think both of those petitions have gotten about 70-some thousand signatures.
Yeah, in the UK, we've actually had the debate, but it was rather perfunctory.
Well, that was a
the
different.
box had to be ticked, and it was ticked.
Right, it was a different petition, and I understand that petitions are. There's a lot of petitions that circulate that people, in my view, fall for. Okay. There are petitions put forth by commercial companies, essentially, to get your information and, try to raise money and do whatever it is they're doing. But there's a difference with an official government or parliament petition. In the United States, we don't have any such thing. And so it's basically the people standing up and saying, look, I need to be heard. I need to be counted. And when you see your government ignore that, quite frankly, it infuriates people even more. In Australia, there's a group called Australia Exits the WHO, and all around the world, if you go to exitthewho.org, I've worked with people in dozens of nations. If you go to preventgenocide2030.org, there's a list of actions in various nations there. If you go to Meryl Nass's doortofreedom.org, and click on the various nations around the world, there are groups everywhere around the world who are awake to this. And if you don't find a group, start one. And, if you have any questions, if you want to try to get connected to people in your nation, reach out to me. If you have any questions, I don't know everything, but I know enough about this to try to give people guidance in terms of where to head and where to look to get informed. Anybody who is unaware of this, the simple thing to do that anybody could do is take this video, share it with absolutely everybody you know and just ask them what they think. Now, if some people come back and say, "Oh, that Roguski guy, what is he smoking?" Well, okay, fine, that's their opinion. But if they honestly look at it and they still have the capacity to think and they ask you some questions and they want to know more, become better friends with them. What we need to do is band together with the people who still have critical thinking capabilities. That's what the problem is. If people don't want to know, they don't want to hear it, they don't want to learn anything new, you just can't help them. Give them another blue pill and let them continue to live in the matrix. If if they're curious and this is a red pill for them, that the WHO is negotiating, building out laboratories, to bring more pathogens in, to make more mRNA jabs, if that doesn't offend them, wish them a blessed day, pray for them, and hope that they come to their senses at some point. But really, don't waste your time. Work with the people who
And
understand.
you can send us a list, James, of all the many links that we can put in the description. If you can send us a list
I certainly will. I absolutely certainly will. And
in the
so,
description.
I'm quite optimistic because with people like yourself and all the people that you've been communicating with, and the millions of people around the world, there are enough people who are awake and aware and are not accepting dogma, but are asking questions, are being good scientists. They're asking questions, they're observing, they're analyzing, they're looking at things with fresh eyes rather than just accepting everything because somebody said so. And so if you run into somebody like that, befriend them, work with them, identify whatever it is, their focus is. What we need to do is be better organized amongst the people who still have the ability to be critical thinkers and learn something new and adapt their view of the world to move forward. I'm optimistic for 2024. I'm looking forward to uh, we'll see what the WHO does, but because what they are doing is so fundamentally flawed, um, we must make it fail. We absolutely must.
I agree, but fundamentally flawed philosophies and politics have partially succeeded in the past. So um, I'm encouraged by your optimism, though, James. I must say.
Well,
Now,
you
the
can
public, the world. Sorry,
no, you can look at a problem
please.
and you can put your head in the sand and say, "Oh my God, they're going to win," and but when you have your head buried in the sand, that's the perfect position for a good swift kick in the butt. People need to be aware,
Yeah, yeah.
but being aware of their plans and their whatever it is they're plotting to do, um, you can be afraid of it, or you can say, "Oh hell no," and I'm going to do something to change it. In the United States, we're supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and unless people find that courage inside, we will lose our freedom, right? So what is it that anybody can do? Get better informed and help as many other people as you possibly can be better informed. And if people don't want to know, okay, fine. Work with the people who do want to know. And what you'll find around the world is there are millions, if not billions of us. And we just need to get a little bit better connected, a little bit better organized. But the fallacies, the lies, the fraud, and the just inaccurate plans that they have to solve the wrong problem. You know, the next pandemic is not going to be prevented by seeking out more pathogens and building more biological labs to make more mRNA vaccines. I think we all know that, but they apparently don't want to hear
Yeah, and don't mourn for me. Organise.
it.
I've got another couple of questions. That was Joe Hill, wasn't it? The union leader. Don't mourn for me, organise.
Hmm.
I think I'm open to correction on that. Now, the World Health Organization have been talking quite a lot about climate change lately. Do you think they could use climate change as a fake, as a public health emergency of international concern, and say, look, there's an issue here with climate change. We're taking these powers to impose things in individual nation states and on individuals. Is that a threat?
The current international health regulations, without any change whatsoever, empowers the Director General to declare a public health emergency of international concern pretty much however he wants. The only limitations that are on that is if you cry wolf too many times, people are just going to ignore your next claim. And so I've always called it moneypox. When he declared a public health emergency of international concern for moneypox, the world mostly collectively yawned, right? Imagine the blowback that the WHO would get if they are stupid enough to try to pull that one. Now, could they? They could do that now, okay? But oh my goodness, the fires, that would probably be one of the best things. I don't want to invite it, but the stupider and stupider they, are with whatever it is they're doing, it only serves to awaken more and more and more people. And so um,
I think
I
the monkeypox is a good example there.
well, I call it moneypox because I know people who live in
Yeah,
nations
yeah, to make money. Yeah,
that had a lot of that have monkeys that are indigenous, and they didn't seem to have any problems. It was only a problem in nations that have a lot
no.
of money.
And monkeys, of course, are a wonderful part of the ecosystem, which we want to which we want to support.
Right.
Another concern a lot of people have, James, is we know that a particular philanthropist is the biggest landowner of agricultural land now in the United States. Why he's bought all that, we don't know. Working through international health organisations, working through international organisations generally, the control of seed, the control of fertilizer. If you could control, and I know I'm into slightly wacky territory here, but if you could control global food supply, you would control the world, wouldn't you? Is there a risk to global food supply, do you think?
Well, that's stepping a little bit out of the WHO and into really the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you just look at the facts of, Bill Gates's history, and you ask yourself, how did he give away all of his money and then get richer? You understand that the entire
Yeah, yeah, I've wondered
structure,
that one.
yeah, you understand, the money laundering capabilities of setting up a foundation. If you go back to the 1920s, a century ago, in Benito Mussolini, he talked about a combination of government and corporations being fascism. Well, my view is that in the 21st century, it's gotten an upgrade. And that upgrade is a third leg, which are all of these non-government organizations. These philanthropic, or um, philanthropathy, really, it's a disease. Um, it becomes a circular money laundering scheme where, and thank you for reminding me. I wanted to mention this as well. My friends at the interestofjustice.org are actively getting people to comment on what the WHO is currently working on, which is their 14th general. Um, oh, I'm going to mess up the name. Their general program of work, GPW. Their 14th general program of work is being laid out, and they're basically, John, maybe you'll catch an invite if you keep your calendar open in the fourth quarter of 2024. They need to raise money. And so if you hear the phrase general plan of work associated with the WHO, they only get about $500 million currently in assessed payments from the various nations. They spent $3.8 billion in 2022. So 84% of their money comes from either extra donations from the nations or from, groups like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so they are very concerned that that 84% comes with strings attached. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to raise more money that doesn't have those strings attached to it, but they're having trouble. And so they're on a big fundraising kick, and they're going to be inviting donors in the fourth quarter of 2024 to try to raise $11 billion for their next general program of work, most of which includes more mRNA jabs. I mean, it's the same flawed thinking. And so the executive board of the WHO is meeting from January 22nd to the 27th. And most of what they're likely to be talking about is money. The WHO needs money. And this is the issue behind the vast majority of this. I'm a proponent of ending that fraudulent money laundering, pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex salesmanship. I mean, basically, the WHO is a fancy sales organization for the pharmaceutical industry. And they just want to build it out with public money and any donations that they can get. And we all just need to realize that health doesn't come from a needle, and health doesn't come from an unnatural chemical compound that changes your symptom pattern by poisoning you. Health comes in a variety of ways, a holistic view of, what's in your heart, your soul, your diet, your environment, everything under the sun. They've lost their way. They don't care about any of that really. They're owned by the people who donate, and they do what their owners tell them to do.
James, thank you so much for that update. We'd certainly love to talk to you again after January the 27th. Just a short update on that would be very welcome. We'll put all the links that we've talked about. You're going to send us a list of the links that people can click on with your contact details. So thank you for that. And to the degree which I'm able to speak for the people in the world, James, thank you for the last 2 years. Solid work. How you do it. This interview started at 6 o'clock in the morning, California time, which I would be completely non-functional. So that's the level of dedication of what you're demonstrating. So thank you for that, and God bless you, James.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm cranking it up to another and newer level. So anybody who shares my desire to make 2024 the year that we the people take back our power and authority and work to make the world a better place, I'm looking to hear from each and every one of you. So thank you, John. I appreciate what you do as well.
Yep. And on that note, we the people, James, thank you.
Thank you.